At 3:17 a.m., over central Iran, a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, callsign Anvil 31, was entering its final attack corridor south of Isfahan. Inside its weapons bay were 16 GBU-31 JDAMs, fitted with BLU-109 penetrator bodies, each programmed to strike a hardened underground missile depot near Mount Safa. The bomber had not been tracked across Iran, but that did not make the next few minutes safe. Iran did not need to follow the B-2 from the border to the target. It only needed to defend the place the aircraft was forced to enter before release. Around Mount Safa, Iranian air defense crews had tightened their radar coverage, concealed surviving launchers, and waited for the attack corridor to narrow. Anvil 31 was still a ghost in the sky, but the closer it moved to the release point, the fewer paths that ghost could take. That was when the trap began to move. As Anvil 31 pushed deeper into the final corridor, Iran's Ghadir radar swept across the southern approach to Isfahan and caught a disturbance inside the release zone. It was not a clean track, but it was enough to confirm movement in the one corridor an attacker would likely need. The warning went out immediately. Around Mount Safa, Iranian operators tightened their search sectors, shifted their antennas, and began turning the airspace above a protected target into a closing box. Inside the B-2, the crew saw the change immediately. The defensive display began marking radar activity ahead and slightly east of their flight path. The pilot did not make a dramatic turn. He made a small correction, just enough to keep the bomber near the edge of the radar coverage while preserving the line toward Mount Safa. The aircraft continued forward, steady and quiet, but the clean path was starting to shrink. Every mile closer to the target made the bomber's options narrower and Iran's search problem smaller. Then, the second layer of the trap came alive. South of Isfahan, a square pair engagement radar from an S-200 VE battery lit up from a concealed position. On the Iranian side, the radar antenna began feeding a tighter picture into the command network. Launcher crews did not fire yet. They did not need to. Their first move was to force the B-2 to react. If Anvil 31 stayed on its original line, the S-200 would gain more time to refine the track. If the bomber turned too far away, the bomb release geometry would begin to collapse. The B-2 crew chose survival without abandoning the mission. Anvil 31 shifted its nose toward the threat, reducing the radar return and sliding away from the strongest part of the S-200 search. From the outside, the movement would have looked small, almost calm, a black aircraft adjusting its angle in the night. But inside the cockpit, that small movement changed the math of the strike. The target was still ahead, but the original attack line was no longer clean. The mission commander now had to rebuild the release solution, while the bomber kept moving toward the most defended point in the sky. For several seconds, the S-200 pressed harder. Its radar held the sector, trying to turn the disturbed air into a firing track. Then, the battlefield widened. Far outside the immediate kill zone, American support aircraft picked up the S-200's emissions and began pushing pressure back toward the battery. The Iranian crew understood the danger. If they kept the radar burning too long, they risked becoming the next target. If they shut it down too soon, the B-2 would regain the corridor. That hesitation opened a narrow gap. Anvil 31 pushed through it. Not free, not safe, but still alive and still moving toward Mount Safa. But the gap did not last. As Anvil 31 forced its way back toward the release corridor, Iran shifted the fight to a more dangerous layer. Northeast of Isfahan, a Bavar 373 battery began tightening its radar search around the same patch of sky the S-200 had just disturbed. The S-200 had not killed the bomber, but it had done something almost as valuable. It had bent the B-2's path, damaged its timing, and pushed it closer to the place where it had fewer choices. Inside the cockpit, the threat picture changed again. The S-200 was still pressing from one side, but now the Bavar 373 was searching from another. If Anvil 31 turned away from the S-200, it risked giving the Bavar 373 a better angle. If it turned away from the Bavar 373, the bomb run would drift even farther from the release solution. The bomber was no longer crossing open sky. It was moving through a hallway where every door was being closed from the outside. Anvil 31 activated its electronic countermeasures. False returns began bleeding into the Iranian radar picture, smearing the bomber's position just enough to make a clean lock difficult. Far outside the kill zone, American support aircraft added pressure with electronic decoys and jamming, forcing Iranian operators to decide which signals were real and which were bait. But Iran did not break. The Bavar 373 crew stayed focused on the corridor above Mount Safa. Decoys could fly anywhere. The real attacker had to reach the release point. Like a goalkeeper ignoring the fake run and watching the ball, the Iranian battery kept its radar pointed at the space above the depot. Inside the B-2, every second became heavier. The mission commander rebuilt the release data while the pilot held the aircraft steady. Each correction had to do two things at once: keep the bomber alive and keep the bombs accurate. It was like threading a needle while someone kept shaking the table. Then the final problem arrived. Anvil 31 was almost over the release point. It could not keep dodging. If it delayed, the bombs would miss the geometry they needed. If it turned away, the mission would fail. So, the bomber opened its weapons bay. For a few seconds, the B-2 stopped being a perfect ghost. Open doors, internal racks, and moving weapons broke the smooth stealth shape. Iranian screens sharpened. The Bavar 373 finally saw enough to build a real firing picture. And at that exact moment, the bombs began to leave the aircraft. The first GBU-31 dropped cleanly into the night, then the next, then the next. Inside the weapons bay, the rotary launcher kept turning, feeding 16 2,000-pound penetrators into the air one by one. From below, the B-2 was no longer just a faint disturbance. For a few seconds, it had open doors, exposed racks, moving bomb bodies, and hard edges reflecting back into the Iranian radar picture. The Bavar 373 crew saw the return sharpen. On their screen, the target was no longer a rumor. It was a high-altitude aircraft directly above the release zone. The Mirage 4 radar tightened its beam and pushed fresh data to the fire control console. The battery commander had the shot he had been waiting for. A Sayad 4 series interceptor sat ready on the launcher, its nose pointed into the black sky, waiting for permission to climb. But the moment Iran found the B-2, the Americans moved to break the picture. West of the kill zone, the support package pushed harder. Electronic attack aircraft flooded the edge of Iran's radar network with false returns, while F-35s watched for any radar that stayed active too long. On Iranian screens, the clean image of the B-2 began to swim inside a storm of decoys and noise. It was like trying to photograph one black car in heavy rain, while someone kept flashing headlights in every mirror. The Bavar 373 did not let go. Its crew knew the real target was not the noise to the west. The real target was the aircraft above Mount Safa. They held the beam, feeding the fire control console just enough track data to support a launch. At the same time, the S-200 battery tried to recover its own track from the south, adding another line of pressure against Anvil 31. Inside the B-2, the crew could see the trap tightening again. Bombs were still clearing the bay. The aircraft could not turn hard without disturbing the final releases. It could not keep the doors open any longer than necessary. For those seconds, Anvil 31 was balanced between two clocks: the launcher clock inside the bomber and the missile clock on the ground. Then, the last bomb cleared the bay. The weapons bay doors began to close. That movement changed everything. The smooth stealth shape started to return, and the sharp radar image on the Iranian screen began to fade back into noise. The Bavar 373 commander understood what was happening. The window was closing. He authorized the shot. The Sayad 4 series missile erupted from the launcher in a white column of flame, climbing hard into the night. Its booster pushed it upward toward the last clean position of the B-2. But by the time the missile cleared the rail, Anvil 31 had already closed its weapons bay and started turning away from the release corridor. The interceptor was fast. The radar was powerful. The Iranian crew had made the right read, but the battlefield had changed faster. Above Isfahan, the missile was now chasing a position the bomber had already left. Below it, 16 bunker-busting bombs were no longer part of the aircraft. They were falling independently toward Mount Safa, silent, precise, and already committed. The missile chased the ghost, but the bombs continued the mission. 16 GBU 31 JDAMs, fitted with BLU 109 penetrator bodies, cut through the dark over Mount Safa, their guidance fins making tiny corrections as the mountain grew larger beneath them. They did not fall like ordinary bombs. They fell like tools built for one job: find the reinforced roof, punch through it, and carry the explosion into the place the enemy thought was safe. The first penetrators struck the reinforced surface within seconds of each other. There was no giant fireball at first, only hard impacts, sharp flashes, and concrete breaking under focused steel. The BLU 109 bodies drove downward through the outer protection, burying themselves into the storage chambers before their delayed fuses completed the count. Then the mountain answered. The first detonations erupted deep inside the depot, not on top of it. Blast pressure slammed through the underground corridors, ripping into missile racks, fuel containers, and ammunition cells. A normal surface strike would have scarred the entrance. This strike went into the nervous system. One chamber exploded, then the next caught fire, then the next detonated. Stored rocket motors ignited in a confined space, and the depot began feeding the fire with its own inventory. The B-2 had not destroyed the entire complex by brute force. It had opened the right doors inside the system. After that, the depot's own missiles, propellant, and artillery became the weapon that finished it. By the time Iranian crews understood what had happened, the battle had already split in two. Above Isfahan, the Sayyad 4 series interceptor was chasing an aircraft that had left the equation. Below it, Mount Safa was no longer a protected arsenal. It was a burning calculation error. Iran had built the trap correctly. It narrowed the sky, forced the bomber to maneuver, and found the firing window. But it found it too late. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like, subscribe, and stay with Military Calculus for the next battlefield equation. Military Calculus. Understand the tech that writes history. Goodbye.